This podcast is brought to you by Progressive. Are you driving your car or doing laundry right now? That's good because podcasts go best when they're bundled with another activity. Just like Progressive home and auto policies, they're best when bundled too. Having these two policies together makes insurance easier and could help you save. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. Quote a home and car bundle at Progressive.com. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. Choiceology is a show about the psychology and economics behind the decisions we make every day and how to make better ones. I'm Dr. Katie Milkman. Join me as I share true stories from Nobel laureates, athletes, authors, and everyday people faced with monumental decisions. We'll share useful tools and strategies to help you make better decisions in your own life. You can find Choiceology at schwab.com/podcast or wherever you listen.
Hey listeners, we have an exciting announcement. Our show is nominated for a Webby Award for Best Advice Podcast. And part of the competition is based on audience support. So we need your help. If you want to vote for us, click on the link in the show notes. Thank you so much. All right, on to the show. You're listening to How To. I'm Carvell Wallace. Some of you may not know this, but I didn't go to school for advice podcasting. I actually went to school for experimental theater at NYU. And while I was there, I saw and did my fair share of experimental, weird, downtown, naked theater where we screamed at the audience, doused ourselves in red paint, led them into dark rooms, recited Greek texts over country music. It was good times. But there's this one piece that I saw there that I always think about. This kid, I can't remember his name, told us this story about his childhood, about how his parents were alcoholics and he always felt responsible for everything. And while he was talking, he was riding a stationary bicycle. There was just one light bulb on in the whole theater, and every time he slowed down pedaling, the light would grow dim. And when he stopped, the room went pitch black. That image has always stuck with me. The burden, the stress of it, the helplessness of it. It was a powerful piece of art. I'm sure you probably had a similar experience. Maybe it was a video that came across your feed. Maybe it was a work of public art in your community, or maybe it was an abstract piece at the art museum that allowed you to look at something from a new perspective. Images that haunted you and made you feel things that you didn't even quite understand. Art has this powerful way of sparking reflection, conversation, connection around things that are hard to put into words. But how is big conceptual art even made? How is any big idea made? How do you go about turning an idea into reality without getting overwhelmed? Well, that's why today's listener, Mia, reached out.
My journey definitely started with classical music, and that is a lot of what I still spend my time with. And so as an artist, it's been based in, here's this end product, let's get it ready so it flows the way I expect it to. Let's prepare for these things and know what I'm doing. And so when it comes to the side of creativity that doesn't know those things, it is definitely a lot less comfortable.
Mia is a professional violinist who teaches and performs. She's played in symphonies, she's played in improv groups, she's played as a form of personal exploration. Just listen to a piece she composed about envisioning humanity as brimming and overflowing.
When things fit together, you can just feel the flow and you can feel that element of emotional connection. It's very cathartic to work through difficult things and figure them out. And just emotionally, it makes sense.
Until now, she's mainly expressed her ideas through music, but she's recently been haunted by an idea to make something bigger, more conceptual, something that may not have anything at all to do with music.
We all see in our world that there's a lot of divisiveness and that sometimes connecting to each other can be harder than we want it to be on a day-to-day basis. The original idea came from like asking a whole bunch of people what would make them feel seen.
So Mia started interviewing people in her community about what makes them feel connected, what makes them feel able to open up to someone, what sparks that unnameable joy in them. But now what? Like, what comes next? Mia doesn't know. She doesn't know what other questions to ask, what the final product will be. Will she fill a room with text? Will she invite people to listen to the recordings? The hard part about this kind of work is that since there are no rules, literally anything is possible. So how do you decide?
I'm very good at just collecting a whole bunch of stuff and not finishing something. I just have piles of papers everywhere. So I am that sort of person. But I also have been just, in weird emotional places this year. And so that makes it even harder to kind of conceptualize.
Well, if you're in weird emotional places, I think you're in the right place. You're in good company. Let's put it that way. I have two questions, which are kind of like two sides of the same coin. We don't know what it looks like yet or what it is. Is it in a gallery? Is it whatever? We don't know what it is, but imagine that you've done it and you've done it really well. What is the feeling that the people who've engaged with this work will have?
There are times when I'll be around other people, even just in a silent space, and feel connected to everybody. It feels like those moments when just possibility seems open.
So then the other question I have, this is a deceptively simple question because as an artist, I face this all the time, which is what stops you from just being like, cool, I'm just going to go out and interview a bunch of people and throw a thing together and then see what it's like. And then if it doesn't work out, I'll fix it. What is the fear?
I think the fear is just that it's so out of my wheelhouse that I feel like maybe I'm trying too hard to understand an outcome, basically. The other big fear is just that it will turn into something where I'll feel completely overwhelmed. And if I'm already feeling this overwhelmed at a conceptual stage, what is it going to be like when I have hours and hours of tape to go through?
Yeah, I feel like I feel you so hard on like just being overwhelmed by paper and good ideas that just go nowhere.
That voice is today's expert.
My name is Michaela Leslie-Rule. I am based now in Seattle, Washington. I'm a cultural strategist and I'm an artist.
Michaela has spent the last 20 years or so figuring out how to tell stories through art, and she is the perfect person to talk with about the process of bringing a big, overwhelming idea to life for others to interact with. So on today's show, we're going to talk about how to gather material for a creative project. It could be anything, at home or at the office, and then how to make it something real. And we're also going to take a peek behind the curtain to see how art actually gets made. Stay with us.
This episode is brought to you by Choiceology, an original podcast from Charles Schwab. I'm Dr. Katie Milkman, a behavioral scientist and professor at the Wharton School, and the author of the best-selling book, How to Change. You may have heard expressions like, time to get up and going, today's bad decisions aren't going to make themselves, or bad decisions make good stories. But really, no one wants to suffer the consequences of making a bad choice. Join me as I share true stories from sports heroes, Nobel laureates, and everyday people faced with monumental decisions. We'll discuss the latest research in behavioral science and dive into themes like whether we can learn to make smarter decisions and how powerful it can be to get a do-over. And we'll share useful tools and strategies to help you make better choices in your own life. You can find Choiceology at schwab.com/podcast or wherever you listen.
Apple Card is the perfect cashback rewards credit card. You earn up to 3% daily cash on every purchase every day. That's 3% on your favorite products at Apple, 2% on all other Apple Card with Apple Pay purchases, and 1% on anything you buy with your titanium Apple Card or virtual card number. Visit apple.co/card calculator to see how much you can earn. Apple Card issued by Goldman Sachs Bank USA, Salt Lake City branch. Subject to credit approval. Terms apply.
Okay, so remember that story I told you about experimental theater at NYU? Well, it was there that I first met Michaela. She was 2 years below me, so we didn't hang out much then, but we stayed in touch after we graduated, and she is truly one of my favorite people.
I was a performing artist for a very long time. I'd been on television before I went to school. So I wasn't 3 learning to play the violin, but I had a very early impression of myself as being an artist. There were people who had a very clear vision for themselves as being on television, for example, or, on Broadway or whatever. And I ended up going to South Africa collecting stories. I went to South Africa. It was 2 years after the end of apartheid. And so things were very open. You could just walk into Parliament and talk to Desmond Tutu. It was a very strange sort of moment. And I started collecting interviews about women who were HIV positive, and this was before there were drugs available. So they were recording with me the stories they wanted to leave behind for their kids. What is the story you wish that your kids knew about you? And that was my first time where I felt like I was really trusted with someone's story and sort of felt the responsibility of that trust. And ultimately, it completely transformed the way that I thought about myself as an artist. I ended up doing work in prisons and mounting performances with women who were incarcerated in multiple different places. And I ended up working with people that were homeless and living on the streets, and went back to my deep roots in Mississippi, in the Delta where my mom is from, and started really exploring food culture at the time. That was my way into my family stories, that my living elders didn't really want to talk to me about their experience, but they would talk to me about recipes. So that was sort of a way in. So that's the one parallel path that I'm trying to be linear. And then the other part is that I work as a cultural strategist. So I make projects in this sort of more open-ended way where it's less focused on outcomes in a way. And then I also make projects that are, fee-for-service projects where I'm building campaigns, where I'm trying to use storytelling and narrative in service of policy change.
So you really related to the feeling when we're haunted, you might say, by a vision or a desire to go somewhere, but you don't even know where to begin and we're afraid we're going to be overwhelmed. What is your experience with that space? How do you navigate it?
So I'm a person who's excited about many different things. So I find that I'm often like you, Mia, just there are mountains of paper or snippets of recordings, or if you looked at my desk right now, tons of Post-it notes. And I have so many things to say about the things that you have been saying. But I think that's one of the things for me is collaborators. You can have collaborators at various different sort of moments in your process, but I think sometimes they're really useful in creating the thing, and sometimes it's really useful just as a sounding board, right? People who know how to do things that you don't know how to do.
Well, that's part of why we got together, because you may know how to do some things that Mia is still learning how to do. Mia, I hear and feel the presence of the emotion around this. And I'm not saying that to be trite. I think that's a really powerful thing, right? And sometimes, in my experience, the feeling of emotion around an idea can be the thing that stands in the way of us doing anything, because we feel like it means so much to us and we don't want to mess it up. And I'm wondering if you relate to that feeling at all, Mia.
As far as my emotional journey has gone, emotions have not been a big part of my life until the last couple of years. And so as I start to weave them in a little bit more, I think it does get heightened, and kind of how to step back from that in a healthy way and just go for it. There is an emotional hesitation for that.
What you're talking about, this idea that people leave this experience that they have somehow changed on an emotional level, right? Requires emotion to be part of what you create. And so there's, as you say, step back. I feel like there's some type of, I'm doing this with my hand, some kind of separating that's necessary, right? Some kind of exploration of the thing that makes you hesitate, and also the thing that is actually leading to this desire to make something, which is also emotional, right? It's not a rational, practical thing, right? Creating something that changes people's minds and hearts is an emotional endeavor. So when you bring your emotion to that, then you're more likely to be able to connect to people on the level that I'm hearing you say you want to be able to connect. Does that make sense? I feel like I don't want people to say like, I want to leave my emotions behind. I'm like, that's not what we're here for, right?
So I think Michaela has just given us our first 2 insights. Number 1, be open to collaborators of all types, even just people you bounce ideas off of. Not only does this help you solve creative problems that you can't solve on your own, but it can also help relieve some of the stress and anxiety and burden of having to figure everything out by yourself. The other thing Michaela is saying that I really like is about emotions. It can be tempting to think that we have to get over our emotions in order to start working, but actually, when we're doing creative work or art that is designed to touch other people's emotions, it is good and healthy for us to be in touch with our own and to start from that emotional place. And that's true even when some emotions are hard to work with.
This is not the place to talk about this necessarily, but if you have any experiences with kind of, when I get very excited about stuff, I cry a lot. And so that is very uncomfortable.
Tell me more about that. Like, when does that happen, or what's going on?
I think just anytime I feel vulnerable, which makes it, then I think I'm just realizing this is like, oh my gosh, what am I doing? First of all, it's like, I'm not trying to bring this to this space, but also, I need to figure this out, because in order to do something like this, I have to be able to find ways to be vulnerable with other people and have them be able to share with me their vulnerability.
I think there are for sure times where you as an interviewer are like completely, you're holding back and it's not about your voice. And there are other projects where it is about your voice, right? It is about your emotional life, right? And that creates something new. Like by showing people your own vulnerability in like a one-to-one conversation, you give them permission to also be vulnerable, right? Like, as we talk about not knowing what you're creating, when you say people leave changed, right? Like, giving people permission to be vulnerable in this moment, in this time where we're at, could be incredibly provocative.
It strikes me, most of what really makes a project like this is the engine at the beginning is like having a driving question. The artist is trying to find out something, and so they ask a bunch of other people this thing. And if the question is good enough and evocative enough, then the answers that we get from people are in and of themselves a form of art, like just by itself. And I think one of the things I always struggle to remember as an artist is that when I have an idea, I'm bored with it. I'm like, this is basic. Like, everyone already knows this. But I often forget about how many people are curious and thirsty to hear about something. And so sometimes I think as an artist, we feel like we have to like really come up with a lot, but actually sometimes we just come up with 1 or 2 simple questions and answers. And then the people's engagement with that is like powerful. Mia, can I ask you what kinds of questions you've thought about asking people?
What makes you feel a spark of connection? What is it that allows you to open up? What is it that connects you to a sense of possibility and a sense of spaciousness within yourself? When people talk about psychological research and things like that, they talk about people often do things based on what they need. And so obviously there's part of me that is coming to this because it's hard for me to be vulnerable. I want to see what opens that in other people.
One of the things that I'm curious about is whether you have answered these questions, right? You have a list of questions. You should answer these questions. Like, what does this evoke for you? And record yourself, right? Record your own answers to these questions and then iterate on that, in conversation with other people. And the other thing I'll say is you can play people your answers and then they can respond to what that brings up for them, right? Like that is also a way to create and generate new ideas and new content.
That sounds wonderful. I have very briefly answered things, but never tried. I think for me, the verbal realm is a lot less free. And so doing practices like that will probably open up something as far as feeling like I can be in a space of conversation with people on this.
But then also, why does it have to be talking? Like, you're a musician. Like, if you were asked to engage with these questions that you have, what would be the most free, most honest way for you to respond? Is it talking, or is it playing music, or is it something else? Does that make sense?
I think I will think for a second.
Yeah. I'm thinking about, like, how do we invite people, and how do you construct a question that allows people to really go broad with how they answer it, right? This is a picture of my so-and-so, right? This is a ring that I used to wear, etc. Like, that's another, I'm thinking about this accumulation piece a lot, and like, are we actually accumulating, like, is your desire to actually accumulate words and language, or are we actually accumulating experiences? And if it's experiences, then you really open up the world of what can represent those experiences.
Yeah, that feels much more freeing than just thinking verbally.
I think we might be getting another insight here. Oftentimes, we have these invisible guardrails in our heads where we think things can only be done one way. Essentially, if I interview people with a question, then they have to answer with words too. But part of coming up with an expansive artistic idea means being willing to break those guardrails and fantasize about all kinds of weird possibilities. Like, what if people answered in song? What if they answered in dance and I recorded the sound of their feet? It's not that every weird idea is a good one. It's more like you won't be able to find the really good idea until you give yourself permission to think of all the weird ones. Okay, we're going to take a break. But when we come back, we're going to hear a little bit about how Michaela explored some of her own weird ideas and then pulled off a big, impossible-seeming project. Don't go away.
You know what's great about spring? That you can eat stress-free with Factor's delicious, ready-to-eat meals. Every fresh, never-frozen meal is chef-curated, dietitian-approved, and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. And you can choose from a weekly menu of 35 options, including popular options like Calorie Smart, or Keto, or Protein Plus, or Vegan and Veggie. So what are you waiting for? Get started today and fuel up for your springtime goals. If you're anything like me, you really want to eat more healthily, right? You want to eat keto, or you want to eat protein, or whatever the thing that you want to do this week is. And yet, you don't have time to go and figure out exactly what to eat and how much protein is in this thing and how much keto is in it. That's where Factor is fantastic. Because Factor gives you meals that already conform to the diet that you want to have. Head to factormeals.com/how250 and use code HOW250 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box. That's code HOW250 at factormeals.com/how250 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next box while your subscription is active.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Most of you listening right now are probably multitasking. Yep, while you're listening, you're probably also driving, cleaning, exercising, or maybe even grocery shopping. But if you're not some kind of moving vehicle, there's something else you can be doing right now: getting an auto quote from Progressive Insurance. It's easy, and you could save money by doing it right from your phone. Drivers who save by switching to Progressive save nearly $750 on average, and auto customers qualify for an average of 7 discounts. Discounts for having multiple vehicles on your policy, being a homeowner, and more. So, just like your favorite podcast, Progressive will be with you 24/7, 365 days a year, so you're protected no matter what. Multitask right now. Quote your car insurance at Progressive.com to join over 28 million drivers who trust Progressive. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $744 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2022 and May 2023. Potential savings will vary. Discounts not available in all states and situations.
This podcast is brought to you by Progressive Insurance. Whether you're driving, cooking, or doing laundry, Progressive knows the podcasts you listen to go best when they're bundled with another activity, much like how their Progressive home and auto policies go best when they're bundled. Having these two policies together makes taking care of your insurance easier and could help you save too. Customers who save by switching their home and car insurance to Progressive save nearly $800 on average. That's a whole lot of savings and protection for your favorite podcast listening activities, like going on a road trip, cooking dinner, and even hitting the gym. Yep, your home and your car are even easier to protect when you bundle your insurance together. Find your perfect combo. Get a home and car insurance quote at Progressive.com today. Progressive Casualty Insurance Company and Affiliates. National average 12-month savings of $793 by new customers surveyed who saved with Progressive between June 2021 and May 2022. Potential savings will vary.
We're back with Mia, our listener who was hoping to make an art piece about connection, and Michaela Leslie-Rule, a storyteller who knows how to bring a big idea to life. One of the groups Michaela collaborates with is called the Spiritual Technologies Project, and a few years back, they decided to try to make art out of the experience and wisdom held by Black elders in the American South. They didn't start off knowing what they were going to create. They weren't even sure which aspects were interesting to them. So they just started with research.
We knew we had this question about what do people know that we wish other people knew, right? About this deep spiritual wisdom that was held in churches, that was held by religious and spiritual people. And what did those structures look like? And the people that I collaborate with are musicians. I was coming in from this like documentary perspective, right? The interviewing perspective, I want to make this video, like what is it going to look like? But we didn't have like a clear sense of what the there was, basically. What we knew.
But you still scheduled stuff.
We scheduled.
Even though you didn't
we
know
did.
What was.
We scheduled. We dropped in on a community that, and as you speak about collaborators, one of the collaborators is from Georgia, from a small town in Georgia. So we started there because he had access, right? He had access and he could walk into a church and they knew his family names. And we knew that was important, that people needed to be able to recognize that you weren't there to be extractive. And so we went. Three of us, we showed up in Georgia and we stayed in a church member's house in like bunk beds. And we stayed for 2 weeks and we went to every church that was in this community and churches outside of the community. And that's all I did, basically. I went to Wednesday services. I went to Friday, I went to Saturday and Sunday morning services and I just recorded, the sermons and the sound of the creaking floorboards. And we started to just notice what was interesting to each of us. I'm not religious, right? I don't come from this tradition. So I didn't have a personal history that was giving me a way in. So in some ways I felt a little bit like a fraud, right? I was like, I don't know how to connect to this, right? I'm Black and my family's from the South, but that's it. I don't have this particular story. And so in the beginning I felt like it wasn't me. I'm not the right person to be doing this, all of these things. But each of us gave each other it was an agreement that we had permission to just notice what we notice. So that means that I came back from that first trip with pictures of like Spanish moss and pictures of the back of church pews and what it looked like to take a picture of the lined hymns, right? What that piece of paper looked like when it had been touched over and over again and people's hands. And, I had a completely different idea of what was interesting to me about that place. Right. And then we came back from that trip and started to iterate. Right. We showed each other all of our pictures and what was interesting. We wrote essays about what we'd seen. And then we started to land on, okay, well, what are our actual questions here? Right. So in many ways, we just had one question, which is, what is it like? What does this look like? What does it sound like? What can we learn? And then we built a series of other questions out of that trip. So what I will say is that for us, that was exposure and sort of saturation. And then over the course of, I think 3 or 4 more trips, we would go and the questions became more precise, if that makes sense, right? The questions started to narrow, right? It was messy. It was like an explosion of information and it was very messy, but I wasn't by myself sitting with this information, right? And that's the thing I want to make really clear. If it had been just me, it would have taken me years to be able to figure out, oh, this is the question. It would have been, I think, overly specific in a way where I think in some ways it's similar to you, we wanted people to have an experience at the end, right? We made videos. I edited videos and I made a website and we had all of these assets that we wanted to create so that people could see and hear the voices of these people that we'd met. And then we started thinking, oh, actually, this music is about a physical experience of being bathed in sound, of being in a structure.
Our Father, we come down, Master, to tell you, thank you.
Thank you, Lord. Thank you, yes.
There's something special about the actual structure. So then the question then continues to refine. Does that make sense? Like, for me and for this project, and I hear this in your project, and I may be just totally overstepping, but I feel like it is big, right? This is a big thing that could have multiple parts. And then the question is, so where do you start? Not where do you end?
Yeah, as soon as you said the word saturation, I was like, there's something about that, and just giving the space for it to happen over time, and not to think that it has to be like, okay, next week it's going to be figured out. Obviously. But to really hear how extensively that back and forth happened for you, and the collaborative element, that was really inspiring.
The other thing that strikes me about what Michaela said is that, again, it's that at the beginning we have this feeling that we should know the answers, but actually the material gave you the next step in some sense, right? Like, it was the actual content that you gathered that helped you find the structure, instead of being like, I'm going to create this structure and I'm going to decide this from the beginning, and then I need to find the content to fill it.
And like, your questions get smarter, right? Like, you talk to people and you get smarter, your questions get smarter, they get more specific. You kind of learn what you're doing that was my experience. It was like a learning what exactly it is that I'm doing as we sort of proceeded through the work.
All right, I think this counts as another insight, right? Oftentimes, we believe that we have to have all the smart thoughts at the beginning of the project. Like, we don't even give ourselves permission to start unless we think our idea is smart enough. But what Michaela is describing is something different. She's talking about just giving yourself permission to notice, permission to just see what is there to see, and to trust that as you sit with more and more information, your whole idea will get smarter and sharper.
I find myself wondering, as the process made itself clear, just over time, how did you and your collaborators keep abreast of all of the different layers as they wove together, because of how many different things you did with this?
Yeah, I think in the beginning we had specific domains. Like, I was doing a lot of video and film work, and so that was really my space to at least to lead, right? Even if we worked together to determine what exactly was going to go where. I felt like that helped with my confidence, because I didn't have the connection to the space in the same way as some of my collaborators, but I did have an expertise. I had something to offer. And so for me, and I think this worked for us, it depends, how much you trust people and what your experiences are with people. But I think it's nice for people to feel like, I know how to do this thing, and I'm going to make something. And then you show it to everyone. And then we have conversations about it. That is one thing I do want to say, that I feel like this is it's not the white supremacist model of doing things. Like, we had a lot of time. Like, we applied for grants with planning time, with time to sit together in like Jacksonville, Florida, in some Airbnb and like watch videos. And that was something that we planned for, that we knew that the collaborative part of the work in some ways was more important, right? The collaboration and the talking with people was more important than the output. But I think that is something that more people should do, especially Mia, when you're saying, I'm not sure, I'm not sure what this is, etc. Like, the time to experiment without the pressure of having something that is perfect and ready for the public is like critically important.
I have put some feelers out for people to collaborate with in kind of the music and more of the spiritual community side of things as well. I think the collaborative element is going to be the only way that it's going to ever happen. But I do have a question related to that, as far as like when you have other things that might be making you money, and there is this larger project that is also there, and then you have stress cycles of other sorts. There is that energy component of like, when I have one day off, do I really, like, is that, am I going to give it to that? Yeah, I'm just wondering kind of how you have found your way through those sorts of times?
I mean, I'm going to say two things. One is it helps to have time. And two is if you wait for the right time, then you'll never make anything, right? So it's like both things are true.
It's a great paradox.
Right? Both things are true, right? So
for me, it's very much like I know now that I have a little container of space in which I try and get work done. I don't always get work done during that container. I really don't, because sometimes I'm not in the mood. I don't have, the vibes aren't right. I'm distracted. Now I'm like scrolling Instagram, what have you. And it sort of drives me crazy that I do that sometimes. But I also have learned over the years, and this is just like a working artist thing for me, is that when the window is closed, I'm out. I'm not working. So, because the problem with being a freelance creator of any type is that you can feel like you have homework due all the time. And so you're never off the clock because you're just like, I should be working, I should be writing, I should be interviewing, I should be editing, I should be. And so at a certain point, I've learned to just be like, okay, this is the work window. And then once the window's closed, I shouldn't be editing or writing or whatever. I should be making dinner. I should be hanging out with my friends. I should be like watching a movie. I should be reading. I get to do this. And so that's, having those little windows has both helped me separate things, and it's also helped me make more use of those windows over time, because I'm like, okay, well, this is what I have. The other thing, and this is not a very satisfying answer, is that there are some projects that push me so hard I have to do them because it'll be more uncomfortable not to. But the kind of procrastinator I am, the way my procrastination is built, is I have to get to the point of great suffering from not doing before I really get underway with the doing.
I have terrible boundaries in my life. And I wanted to say something smart, Mia, but like I have terrible habits that I'm trying to help myself out of. I have been historically the kind of person who works all the time. I am also a procrastinator, like Carvell. What I will say is that for me, and maybe this will work for you, I feel more responsibility to the people that I talk to. And like the fact that they have allowed me the time and have given me space in their lives and that I've heard their stories, then I feel like I'm the one holding those stories, right? And then I feel incredibly motivated to do something with them.
That really carries something that I hadn't thought of before, just that active energy. So I've written some short stories, a lot of poetry, songs, compositions, like just for instruments without words. And all of those, there is that sense of discovering what comes next. And so I think that it will be huge to just start talking to more people.
Michaela, I'm tempted here to think about floating this as a potential kind of like rule of thumb, which is that when confronted with a large scale creative project like this, it probably makes more sense to follow the emotions and the questions first before setting up a structure, before deciding on an outcome. That feels true here. Would you say that to what extent or could you say to what extent you feel like that might be something of a universal truth or good advice for the person embarking on a project such as this?
Can we say that it's can we say a both and? I think you have to spend some time interrogating your own emotional relationship to the work that you want to create, right? Right? Emotions are first, an interrogation of that, and then what questions you have. But I also, per your comment earlier, I think you also have to free yourself to be able to create something out of that. Because I think otherwise you're bogged down in the emotions, if that makes sense. Yeah. I think you have to give yourself permission to be emotionally connected to the work that you're doing. I think emotions are critical, right? That's why we make art, right? On some level. And I think that we need to build achievable things, if that makes sense, right? And that creates some type of structure. Maybe rule one is that you start with your core emotions and explore that and interrogate that, right? But the next thing is about identifying something that you can make and something that you can do.
And even knowing that thing can change, because I think that's another thing that I get panicked about, is like once I decide on a structure, then I'm like, now I have to do that. I said I was going to do it. Now I can never do anything else. But learning over time that like there's a freedom to setting a structure, because now you get to work and fill it. And then you get to be like, okay, well, actually, this needs to be revised or edited, so let's give it another shot. But as writers often say, you cannot revise a blank page, which is something I have to remind myself every single day.
I think it gives you an output though too, right? Like achievable tasks or something like that. Like there's something important about giving yourself things to do that you can accomplish and can accomplish like today, for example, right? And then you can say, I accomplished that. And that helps with building confidence in some ways. And I speak in the world of experiment because that's how I think about the work that I do. So you have to try the experiment, right? You experiment with the structure and then you tweak it and you change it to be big enough or small enough or wide enough or broad enough, right? To be able to contain the work that you want to create.
Can we talk briefly, Michaela, about funding? Just a tiny bit.
Yeah, I feel like this is where you get kind of broad. To be fully transparent, like on the Spiritual Technologies Project in particular, like one of the people that was a collaborator had experience working in philanthropy, right? And so was pretty well versed in sort of the structure. One thing I found in my own work is that yes, I work as an artist and a cultural strategist, but I'm very much aware of what the national conversation is or the local conversation is and how I can connect my work to those things. And I think in my experience, the funding that has been available to me has been things, for example, around democracy, right? Like, because a lot of the work that I do is about connecting people across differences. So there is money available through people who fund civic engagement or democracy funders. The other place that I've often looked for funding is like racial justice, and that money in some ways is drying up in some places just because of the proximity that, we're further from 2020 than we were. But that is one sort of specific place. Collaborative work and the work of sort of transformative experiences. So you spoke, Mia, about spirituality and energy. There are funders that are particularly interested in transformational experiences. And so I would look for, money around that, right? Transforming our culture, transforming our sort of even our narratives, for example. So from a funding perspective, I'm always looking for how I can connect the conversation and the questions that I have to a conversation that others are already having. And the reason that I do it that way is because I don't want to have to sell that hard, frankly. Like I don't want to have to stand up and like invent something for people that really just want to feel like whatever you're doing is within a certain portfolio, if that makes sense.
Mia, I'm sure you have many lingering questions. Which lingering questions would you like to offer here?
There's actually just so much that I'm sitting with that not a lot of space is left in my brain right now. But I guess I am wondering, how do you feel different now when you approach something than you did when you hadn't done something creative in this way before?
That is such a great question. You're going to be very good interviewing people. I just need you to know that. Michaela, do you want to go?
I mean, in the most pure sense, I feel more confident, not in my expertise around whatever the project is, but I feel confident that I can fail and create something. And that is that's my,
there it is.
Yeah. Like, I think I've gotten better at failing and being okay with that. And knowing that, my mom always says, like, everything's going to be okay, right? Like the journey to getting okay, I have no idea what that's going to look like, but everything is going to be okay. And that's what's different.
Yeah. I think I would say pretty much the same thing, which is that at some point in my life, I learned that my fear used to be that something was not going to work out right. And now the reason I don't have that fear isn't because I know things are going to work out right. It's because I know I'll be okay even if things don't work out right. So in that sense, I approach things with less personal anxiety, or less, I should say, I'm less driven by personal anxiety. I still have the anxiety. I'm less driven by it because now I've seen the creative process unfold a couple times. I'm sort of geared up. I know I'm gonna be super excited. It's gonna be a beautiful project. It's gonna be the greatest thing. I'm gonna win a Nobel Prize. Then I'm gonna start doing stuff, and I'm gonna feel overwhelmed. Then I know I'm gonna be like, this sucks. I'm terrible. I'm in the laughing stock. And then I know I'm gonna go through all these phases, and that it's gonna be okay through all of it as long as I just keep taking the next right step creatively. And sometimes the next step is the wrong step, and then I have to go back a couple steps and redo it. But it's like I'm more comfortable now with that process and all of the ins and outs of it than I was maybe 20 years ago.
That was so beautiful, both of you. And I just wanted to thank you for all of your time and just all of your experiences that you shared, because that helps me feel at the beginning of this journey like I have a lot to pull from and just a lot to explore.
I want to thank Mia for welcoming us into her project and to thank Michaela for all of her wonderful advice. If you want to check out her spiritual technologies project that we talked about, it'll be linked in the show notes. Do you have a project we can help with? Send us a note at howto@slate.com or leave us a voicemail at 646-495-4001, and we might have you on the show. And if you like what you heard today, please give us a rating and a review and tell a friend. That helps us help more people. And don't forget to vote for us for the Webby Awards. How To is produced by Rosemary Belson with help from Kevin Bendis. Joel Meyer is our senior editor, and Derek John is executive producer. Mara Jacob is senior technical director and composed our theme music. Charles Duhigg created the show. Courtney Martin is my co-host, and I'm Carvell Wallace. Thanks for listening.